Hey guys, this is Sammy with the Orlando Chess Club and Development Center. We are continuing our Supporting the School series, specifically, and we're going over tactical themes today, specifically the pin. So let's get started. So as you can see, this position, we have our dark square bishop, and black has both of his pieces on dark squares. So this is a great way to utilize a tactical theme known as the pin, where if I were to move my bishop to d4, this black knight cannot move due to me being able to take the king. And in chess, remember, you cannot take the king, you have to checkmate. So you don't capture, you trap. So this black knight can't move, and if the black knight can't move, you just take it on the next turn. And once the king moves from being in check, you just promote your pawn to victory. So that is the introduction of the pin. Bishop d4, and then you just take the knight because the knight can't move. So that is the first puzzle. So here, this is a very similar idea as the previous one, where the white bishop can move to a3, and once again, this rook cannot move because if the rook moves, this king would be in danger. These are both examples of what a type of pin called an absolute pin. And there are two types of pins, an absolute pin and a relative pin, and I'll explain the difference as the video goes on. In the case of an absolute pin, if this rook cannot move due to it being illegal. So once again, bishop to a3, and we just take the rook next move because it's not able to move, and we'll just take it. So this pin is actually a relative pin that we were going to make. The difference between an absolute pin and a relative pin, when we move our bishop to c3, this rook can move. It is a legal move to move the rook. But if the rook were to move, the white bishop could simply take the queen. So we will win the rook for the queen. We will win the rook for the bishop, and the rook is worth 5 points. The bishop was worth 3 points. It's a good trade for white. White will be up an extra rook and easily win the game. So there we go. That is an example of a relative pin. So sometimes when you pin, unlike the previous examples where you pin to immediately win the piece, you pin to threaten winning a piece. So here, the white rook could take the black knight, but then the problem is black takes back. It's a king and 3 pawns versus a king and 3 pawns. Black probably has a draw here. So what's better is you want to really attack the piece again. Because sometimes with pins, you don't want to take the pin immediately. You want to put pressure on the pin. So that way, black could really be tied down. So that's exactly what f4 does. It increases the pin. Once again, black cannot move the knight because this is an absolute pin. The white rook would take the king if it could. So after f4, black simply loses a piece. And white will be up a rook and win the game. So this is a little bit more of a complicated example, but I think you guys could understand it. So the problem here is that the black knight, well, it's actually not that. No, never mind. I thought it was black's move, but it's actually white to move. So once again, this is a standard exploitation of a pin where we take the black knight, but now black is unable to recapture because the pawn is pinned. So previously we looked at examples where pieces were pinned, but now this knight is actually not... the knight looks defended because this pawn is protecting this knight, but it's not really defended since this pawn is pinned. So it's not always pieces that are pinned, but the protection of those pieces that could be pinned, which could also lead to tactics. So once again, white could take this knight. Black is unable to recapture because the pawn is pinned. If the pawn were to take, white would take the king. All right, so let's move on to the next one. So yeah, this is also a complicated tactic. So I will be sure to explain this carefully to you guys. So if you notice, this black knight is practically pinned. There's only one square it could move to not avoid blundering this rook. Because if this black knight moves here, we take this rook, and if black takes back, we take this rook as well, and white would be up a full rook. So this black knight is practically pinned, which allows for this beautiful move. Knight, oh, I accidentally made a move. So let's just go back. That allows for this beautiful tactic, knight takes g5, where if the rook takes, this rook could take this rook, and once again, like I said, guys, the knight is pinned. So if the knight takes, we win this rook, and we are up a full rook. And that is definitely what we want. And same thing, if the knight were to capture, we take his rook for free, and once again, we are up a full rook in either case. So black could defend his rook, but white's just up a pawn here, and he's probably just going to win the game with ease once everything gets traded off. So that is another example. So this is a position where, once again, there's not always pieces that are pinned, but certainly sometimes pawns. So if you guys could notice, this pawn on f7 is pinned. So therefore, this pawn on g6 is technically hanging. So white could simply take this pawn on g6. I made a move again. White could simply take this pawn on g6, and black is just simply getting checkmated here. There's no way to go around it. The only legal move is bishop to g7, where we could just take the next move, and black is checkmated. So it's very important to notice that pawns could be pinned just as easily as bishops, and when you notice these types of pins, you could win a lot more chess games that way, trust me. And let's go to our last example. So here we have our last example where we take advantage of a absolute pin again. If you notice, if we were to move this black rook anywhere, this white queen would be pinned to the white king due to this black queen. So that allows for a beautiful tactical shot. Rook takes h6 check, taking advantage of this pinned queen, because if this white queen were to take that pawn, the black queen could take the white king. And also notice, rook takes pawn comes with check, so the queen is actually not hanging at all. So black's only legal move is actually king to g1. And then if you guys are following along, that's great. And once the king goes to g1, you have another way to exploit a pin by going rook to g3, where this white queen is pinned to the white king. So you win the white queen, and notice the pawn, with the king on g1, this pawn is pinned, because if the pawn were to take, this bishop takes on g1. Complicated tactic. It's okay if you guys can't follow this. It just takes practice. I just wanted to get you guys to be introduced to the very important tactical theme of the pin. Very, very, very important. So once again, rook takes h3 check, king to g1, and rook to g3 wins the queen for free due to all sorts of pins, from the rook pinning the queen to the king and the black bishop pinning the pawn to the king. So that concludes our first lecture with the pin, and I'm looking forward to doing more videos with tactical themes. And it's been a real pleasure, guys, and I will see you in the next video.